Okay, welcome everyone again to this conversation. So this seminar is titled CLAREC in Mexico City, Insights from the World Social Forum 2022 and the CLACSO 2022 conference. Basically, the idea of this event is to share with you some reflections and insights about two events that just happened in Mexico City. It was a great coincidence that my friend and colleague here, Alexandre, and myself were attending two very important events for Latin America and for the social sciences and for social movements that just happened in this month, actually. So what we're going to do today is that each of us is going to be sharing about a 10-minute presentation with the main ideas and some reflections. And we really would like to open this as a dialogue, as a conversation. We thought about it as a very informal, casual situation where we can really just share about the raw ideas, actually, that we're just bringing to this table after going to this event. So Alex is going to start. Alex, he's a PhD student in the Faculty of Education, working on extension and university and social movements. Of course, he will tell you more. He will tell you more about it. So, Alex.
How is the audio now? Good? Great, okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rocío, for introduce. And I'm Alex, I'm from Brazil. I'm looking at my research connected to, as you are going to see, is connected with the World Social Forum. That's why I'm very interested in be part of the event. It was my first time there. So it's supposed to be like a very formal conversation, but I had to write I'm going to read some notes that I have to share just because of my English. So it's going to be easy to keep in time, like to have like more open conversation with you guys. So my interest in the World Social Forum, let me change. I'm going to use PowerPoint just to guide my conversation to make easy what I'm sharing, and sharing some pictures and photos I took from there. My interest in the World Social Forum is due two main reasons. One is as a militant and activist interested in engaging in social issues and social struggles. And another is due to my doctoral research question, which analyze universities and ways of engaging with communities and social movements in order to promote transitions to alternative futures. So I'm particularly interested in understand the conditions, the events, the context, the inspirations that promote or are able to promote this particular social role of the university. In this sense, my research analyzed 3 case studies that is here in the slide, one of which is the Popular University of Social Movements, UPMS, that emerged in 2003 in the context of the World Social Forum. I'm starting, I don't know how many of you heard about the World Social Forum, but I would say that in the imaginary, it is this revolutionary space that emerged at the beginning of the century as a hope for an alternative world, as opposed to that neoliberal capitalist hegemonic model. A space that emerged as a counterpoint of the World Economic Forum, and value plurality and social struggles. So celebrating the emergency of this phenomenon. Intellectuals such as Boaventura Santos, which by the way is the one who idealized the Popular University of Social Movement, that is my case study, highlight the value of this open and plural space, a space with a sense of leadership, hierarchies, and centralized command, which emphasize networks, experimentation, and democracy, a space for utopias to flourish. So this is a good reference if you want to know more about, and after that I can share with you. And the World Social Forum, as they have in their website, is described as is an open space, meeting place for reflective thinking, democratic debate and ideas, formulation of proposals, free exchange of experiences, and interlinking for effective action by groups and movements of social society, civil society, that are opposed to neoliberalism and to dominate the world by capital and any form of imperialism. So this photo in the left is from the first World Social Forum in Porto Alegre in 2001. It became like from the first event, like a very big event. The World Social Forum, the forum always takes place through a different organized committee and follows a chapter of principles that was signed at the first event in 2001. Basically, the chapter aims to ensure that every forum must be built in as a democratic, plural, and committed space for social struggles. According to the information made available by the last organized committee, this year edition in Mexico was the 15th edition. The World Social Forum has emerged in a very progressive and promising context for the left in general in Latin America. As Fabio Merdalet, who I use a lot his research in my research, argues the first decade of the 21st century was the decade one, which with a strong sense of hope and with significant advances and achievements in social areas, especially in Latin America after the election of several left-wing governments. In 2005, the last edition of its history was held in Porto Alegre with more than 155,000 people participate. However, the second decade was significant step backs, a significant step backs in the region with the rise of the right, conservative, and fascism. This contextual change and the consequent impact on the ability of financial resources to hold an event of this size has deeply affected the forum, as we can see in the frequency of editions and the numbers of participants in the second decade of the century. And to add complexity to this scenario, the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 immensely demobilized social movements worldwide and their availability and enthusiasm to organize the event. From this brief context, I comment my experience at the forum that took place last month in May, from 1 to 6 of May in Mexico City. And it was my first time participating in this event. Although I was still gripped in that imaginary I mentioned earlier, I expect that I would find a forum quite different from that phenomenon that was in the past. In Mexico, the first initiative of the forum took place together with the May Day March. It was a massive event. These are some pictures I took from the event. It was a massive event, not because of the mobilization of the social forum, but because of the commemorative date traditionally with a very strong popular and trade union participation in the main urban areas, centers in Latin America. So therefore, I think it was very wise, to start the event by joining forces in this March, especially when the forum need to be strengthened. So those are some other pictures. The activities took place from Monday to Friday that week. And there were cultural activities and commercialization of agroecology and solidarity economic products base, and in outdoor areas, and the seminars, debates, and workshops took place in various places in the city center. So this is just a quick explanation how the forum is organized. The World Social Forum has an international council made up of more than 100 social movements and intellectuals, but which has no leadership role in managing the editions. Every edition has an autonomous organized committee defined to plan the event. In the case of the commission that organized the Mexico Forum, it was decided to have organizational subgroups as shown in this slide. So, and just to have like a quick understand, the activities are developed by social movements, groups, and collectives that have all the freedom to register their initiatives, which are then made available in a program timetable released by the forum. In the Mexico Forum, 365 activities took place during that week. And also as part of the organization model, 10 thematic axes were created at the Mexico Forum to aggregate the activities and facilitate their participation. My participation in the forum was in the axis education, science, and technology, that is highlighted here. And I joined this group about a month before of the forum took place. This group, which include academics, union members, and participants from popular education movements, had the mission to create a specific agenda for that thematic axis. So my experience there, it was related to this group, which would be like more related to the case study. I was more interested participating in this event. And the organization meetings took place online before the event, and the program activities was created that sought mainly to question the hegemonic model and education and value other forms of education, emphasize proposals for popular education. So here in this paragraph, you have like the main objective that this group decide like what would be like the debates and the seminars we would promote. And in this next slide, we define 8 dialogues, roundtables, and most of the meetings were held in the facilities of the Mexican Teachers Union CENT in Mexico. And during this meeting, it became apparent how the lack of political and financial support made the organization of this social forum very, very dramatic. The organized people had to work very hard to guarantee each meeting, the transmission, the dissemination of the panels. However, it was also clear to me the passion of those people to do the voluntary work with almost no resources. Besides promoting debate and articulate some of the participants, these meetings had the mission to identify issues for the elaboration of a manifesto that was presented. It was presented as in favor of the construction of other educations, that is decolonized, non-patriarchal, anti-racist, and anti-capitalist. So this was the main goal of this group, is to produce this manifesto. On the last day of the social forum, there was a general assembly with an open microphone so that the thematic groups and other participant groups could present their conclusions. In the case of thematic groups that I was part, the manifesto was read by the Bolivian educator Noel Aguirre, who played the role of coordinator and articulator in this thematic group. The General Assembly helped me to understand how the forum works and the enormous challenge of staying alive in a current political, economic, social context, especially in Latin America. The region, the most welcome and made the social forum become such a worldwide phenomenon as we saw in the beginning. As I said before, I expect to find a forum very different from that imaginary, given my understanding of the context of the last decade in Latin America, also being part of that context. So it was no surprise to find that situation of great difficulty, of nostalgia for the glory days of the social forum, and especially the feeling of resistance to keep the space, that space alive. But perhaps I did not expect the lack of financial support to occur so dramatically in that country, which is currently the largest country in Latin America with a progressive left-wing in government now. Indeed, it was clear in the closing speeches that the promises of support that the organized committee had when they started to organize the event did not materialize. The local and the federal governments did not help in the organization as they promised in the beginning, as agreed by the general coordinator of the organizational committee in the beginning of the main assembly. But it was also possible to perceive a feeling of rebirth, of hope, from a new wave of left-wing leaders coming to power in Latin America in the last years. So I could feel like this environment, like people get again dreaming, could dream again. Like me, most of the people I spoke there to in the World Social Forum, it was the first time they were visited the World Social Forum. And I realized that even of distance from the reality we experienced there, that imaginary of the World Social Forum was still mobilize people to dedicate and invest time and resources to be there. To conclude, I think that the forum is at a crucial moment as to what it will be, whether it will remain being reinvented in this new context that it's promising for Latin America, or whether it will continue to be less and less political relevant, but is still inspiring new spaces and initiatives. Besides the popular University of Social Movements that emerged in the World Social Forum, my case study, the Social Forum has contributed to the emergence of many initiatives worldwide. The time of articulation in such an event is indeed very short, and the objectives end up being very limited for that week. But I'm primarily interested in understanding its capacity to create conditions such as inspirations, spaces, and meetings for other initiatives to emerge. In the case of our group of education, on education that I was part, there was the intention of continuing with the articulation of the event. We have already met twice after the forum to continue with the conversation around the manifesto. We produce it, but it is very likely that this will not be maintained with time. So, well, sorry, maybe I took too long, but there is our arguments, and let's open for a conversation. But I'm going to pass to Rocío now to present like the wonderful experience in CLACSO.
I'm going to use his phone. Okay, you can hear me well? Yes, great, thank you. Well, so I didn't introduce myself before. My name is Rocío Fernández. I'm from Chile. I'm a doctoral student here at Cambridge, working in teachers' work and education policies with a focus on my country, but also globally. And okay, so I'm gonna be sharing some key ideas about the CLACSO conference and also some reflections. I'm particularly interested in sharing this with you and hopefully in having a conversation about those. But first, I'm gonna tell you about what's CLACSO, for those of you who don't know what is it. So CLACSO stands for the Latin American Council of Social Sciences. This is an institution founded in the late 60s that basically reunites several research groups and research centers and postgraduate programs around 800, I believe, based in Latin America, but also in the US, in Europe, and some of them in Africa. The objectives of this council are basically the promotion and the development of research and teaching in around social sciences, also the promotion of the cooperation and articulation between these institutions that are partnered and their members, and to disseminate the knowledge that is produced in the region and about Latin America among different social scientists and also social movements and activists. It has a very critical and plural thinking, because it basically aims to better understand what's going on and the challenges for Latin America and for the Caribbean as well. So this conference, which is the main event of CLACSO, takes place every 3 years. And also the General Assembly of the CLACSO committee takes place during this conference. It's 4 or 5 days of conference. Might be one of the biggest from my understanding, because it reunites this one reunited about 15,000 people with more than 1,000 activities and events grouped in more than 100 networks. So why did I go to CLACSO, right? Because I'm studying here in Cambridge. It's a quite far journey. There are many conferences happening, some of them that are much more related to my own research, to my specific field. However, I wanted to, first of all, share my preliminary findings. I'm on my 3rd year, so we know that we are, at this stage, we are supposed to start sharing what we're doing in these academic events. But I wanted to have feedback from what I believe is my community, from my region, from Latin America. So first, because of that, and also because, and this, I hope this speaks to those from Latin America studying or living here in the UK or in Europe or in the US maybe. There's a huge disconnect that I think we cannot avoid, and we need to be mindful about. So I really wanted to kind of get to know and connect with what are the main debates, with what are the current ideas, not just by reading them, but by being on the field, on the territory, and I'm gonna talk about that. Well, the video that Alex was just showing is just to give you an idea of how was this conference, what's the size of it, and what was the people involved. So I have, at the moment, 4 main key ideas that, as I mentioned at the beginning, are very raw. I came back a couple of weeks ago full of thoughts, of feelings, of like things that happened in this big event. And I'm starting to process this, and I hope this conversation helps for that. These, of course, are not my ideas, are basically my interpretation of what others said during the conference. So first of all, there's an impression and a situation of the continent being in a point of inflection. The multiple crises that have been going on and that we have been experiencing over the past years and that are still present, together with the different answers of the social movements and indigenous reactions and from the indigenous nations in the region, could be seen as a manifestation of a tipping point, maybe, in the history of the region, in terms of the number and the rate of the violence against women, the new forms of the precarization of life, the concentration and accumulation of land that's also growing, the consequences of climate change that have been impacting the region from decades. It's not something new or not something that's gonna happen. It's already been happening. And all the new forms of extractivism, right? So it's a region also after the COVID, the pandemic, that it's in a deep pain. And that even though we can read about this from this other side, from Europe, from Cambridge, being there and experiencing and seeing them is very different. So others refer to this as a new cycle of extractivism in the region, in its many forms: militarization, accumulation. Also, let's remember that the new forms of technology and the digital era that we're seeing also require a lot of ghost work and a lot of raw materials for which Latin America and all the resources that we have there are fundamental. I'm thinking about the case of Chile, of my country, and the lithium, for instance, which is very crucial for the manufacturing of all the new technologies, and that has recently been privatized, for instance. And also more investors, more entrepreneurs going to the region and buying lands and seeing this as an opportunity for future accumulation. So I thought that this sort of urgency that was in the atmosphere there is rarely experienced here in Europe, where we are supposed to be producing this high quality and this high level of research. And there I saw an academia that, even though it has a lot of problems, right? I'm not gonna say it doesn't have any problems, but that I think is mobilized from affects more than what we have here. And also from a view and from a perspective of how things can change, or at least of why things should change. And although we know about this, probably the main data about inequality in Latin America is actually produced in these universities, the way in which we come to know things could be, which is very different, right? The forms in which we know might play a big difference in the sense of how we study, how we relate with these phenomena. And that's what I'm thinking right now. Second, the struggles in Latin America, and this was one of the key ideas of one of the panels on social movements that I attended. The struggles in Latin America are struggles for the reproduction of life. And the region has a history of a struggle for the control of the conditions in which, I'm seeing myself, sorry, it's distorting. Okay, and the region has a history of a struggle to control the conditions in which the reproduction of life happens, right? So here I'm talking about life in the forms of the land, of the water, of health, also of education, of caring activities as well. And this main idea was mentioned by Colombian academic Natalia Quiroga. And when we fight for life, we kind of recognize that we need each other to live in community. And that actually our lives depends on the life of others. So the revitalization of social movements, and maybe this will contrast a lot with what Alex was just saying, was presenting us in terms of the World Social Forum, and that'll be interesting to compare later. The current revitalization of the social movements that we've seen in the last decade has been a product mostly of the feminist movement, right? And the feminization of this struggle that have put the reproduction of life at the center of the struggles. So actually, she said, Natalia Quiroga said, so when we go out to the streets and we claim for the basic and fundamental aspects of the life, the neoliberal discourses, the neoliberal discourse gets destabilized and actually loses legitimacy, because for many decades, the well-being, the security, the social mobility, all things that have been marketized from a neoliberal perspective, but actually when we reclaim these struggles from this other perspective, then we could put the neoliberal discourse we could attack the neoliberal discourse. So third, a key point about this is the role of knowledge and the role of knowledge production in relation to this. If we're talking about a tipping point, a new crisis coming, also the need to revitalize and continue revitalizing the struggles and actualizing them, coming from the social sciences and from academia, we need to rethink about what's the role that's being played by the knowledge and by the ways in which we produce knowledge. So here, probably I believe, and I would like to hear your opinion on this. I believe that the type of knowledge that's going to be more useful is the one that is actually connected to these struggles for the reproduction of life in its multiple forms. And I would like to bring here the concepts of the vivir sabroso, which the translation might be live tasty or yummy. I don't know if you can help me, Spanish speakers, or the buen vivir, or the dignity of life. That's also been one of the key points of the protest in Chile, as a concept that actually recognizes the idea of the community, of the coming together to fight for a better life in a dignity, from dignity way. Also, there's a lot of work to do in the ways in which we understand inequality, I think. And bear in mind that I'm coming from 3 years studying in Cambridge, right? And going suddenly to Mexico and to hear all about this, and now sharing these thoughts with you. There was a very interesting research group on borders, frontierization, and globalization that I heard from, who talk about the spatial theory and the need to produce a spatial theory of the unequal development with a focus on Latin America because of all the extractivist zones that take place there. Also about the knowledge production, I'm thinking about where do we place any subaltern actor in our research? And I'm not referring exclusively to our participants, because at least here in the Faculty of Education, we do talk a lot about how we relate with our participants, how we can build better ways to relate with them, to be ethical. Also, all the ethics forms and things that we need to fill up to conduct research actually recognize that dimension. However, I think talking about the participants is one thing, but talking about subaltern actors is a very different one. And I wanted to bring it here as well. Also, the use of concepts, right? We did a reading group a couple of years ago about the idea of Latin America, but also we're usually using all these European theories, and there's a lot of value in each of those theories. But how pertinent, how relevant are these concepts and theories for the current struggles is something we have to talk about. Also, this research group that I was just bringing here works a lot from the praxis, and that was something that I don't usually see here. From an actual research perspective, not just as a methodology, but also in the sense that they do recognize their own place as actors that have been to these processes of accumulation of extractivism, and that have impacted in their life stories in different ways. So, for instance, if I reflect about my own story as a middle class or working class person growing up in Chile, I could also come to think about the process, the different processes of neoliberalization and marketization of the life that are actually embedded in my own life story. And if we put all these stories together, we probably could create some sort of collective subject with a better understanding of these inequalities. And finally, there was a strong feeling about the academic extractivism, and I don't think this is something that Latin America is away from. There's a lot of academic extractivism there anyway, in academia, generally speaking, and it's about time, right, to stop it and to think about what we do with the data, what are the bonds and the relationships that are behind any data that is produced, right? All the open source and open data and open science movements that are very popular here in Cambridge and I believe in Europe are very good in the sense they try to collectivize research and the data. However, they might come from a very Western view of access and democracy. And I'm thinking particularly in how this might impact subaltern groups, or for instance, indigenous groups that have opened, in certain occasions, have opened their doors for early career researchers or for academia to conduct research. And then they don't really control what's going on with the research that is produced based on their knowledge, right? So this is a view that, for instance, could clash with the open science movement here. And finally, just to open the conversation finally, I would like to bring two questions. So one is, that are questions that actually I have for myself, but of course I would like to open to all of you. One is, what is the role of what could be the role as Latin American academics or students living in Cambridge or in the global north? And also, what are the limits maybe of the knowledge production as we stand in this other side, in this other territory? And I'm thinking about the very physical presence of our body, which is different from being here. And once we are there, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Should you open your mic or my mic?
No, yours.
Okay. So thank you, Steve. So the idea now is to really open the conversation. As we mentioned, we planned this as a very informal conversation. We even thought about doing this with, sharing some drinks and just trying to get around these thoughts. So any comment, any question that you might have about everything that we've said will be very, very welcome. Yes, thank you, Heidi, for posting the questions that I mentioned on the chat. Also from people here, maybe. Okay, there's a question here in the. Sorry. I just want to make sure that people can hear it. Can you hear Mikel? No, but hear him? No. Oh, you are using, okay. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just there, like one more activist background, but with some work on knowledge, and the other one more academic background, but with a lot of focus on activism and movement. I want to know from both of you, what is your opinion? How academic knowledge can actually help activists on the ground, other way around, how activists can actually engage in academia. Fruitful for both. And then it becomes an exercise of exchange. I think that this kind of interesting balance.
Yeah, that's a good question. You can hear me, right? Yeah. Okay. So I don't know how was the sound there, but Michele here in the room is basically asking what would be a good balance between activism and academia in a fruitful way. And yeah, probably that's one of the key questions, right, of this conversation. I don't have a clear answer yet, and I'm working on it. But so far, I think even though each of each of those dimensions, activism and academia, have different roles and occupy different purposes, definitely. I think as academics or as scholars or any of that field, we should also recognize ourselves as social actors and recognize our place in activism if we're interested in it. For instance, when I think about myself, I think it's very hard to dissociate like Rocío as a doctoral student from Rocío as a, you know, as a person participating from social movements. That's the first thing, to don't split or don't create these maybe fake boundaries when we are actually the same people. However, I do think that the question goes a bit beyond that, right?
Yeah, in the CLACSO, I mean, there was other interaction between the two.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about it?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's maybe that comes to the research agenda. I was talking about this notion of urgency that, you know, inequalities are rising, like we can see them. And it's something that I don't really think we can really perceive here in Cambridge, because it's such a bubble. We were just talking about that with Steve, actually. And yeah, that, I don't know. I think I'll leave it here for now, and we'll pass it to Alex.
Can you hear me? Yes. So, yeah, difficult question, but it's very related to what I'm looking at in my research. I think it's usually it's very unbalanced how you find this space, like, or how you discuss like knowledges that come from the social movements and from academia. And I think it's, particularly in the social forum, I think it has changed a lot. So it started very, first of all, I don't have like this background in terms of activists. So I'm just developing this. I'm more engaged like in the last 5 years. So I'm still learning with the movements and how they work. And this special space that is the World Social Forum has changed a lot. I listened from a person for a movement in Brazil that it was very engaged in the beginning. It's not anymore. So saying that now the World Social Forum is more like a NGO space more than really social movements. So I think there is this kind of space. It was very important to bring to develop the bridge between both of them. And I think particularly in Latin America, you have more spaces to put together this kind of knowledge. I think we are more advanced in terms of like how to understand how to connect them, especially because I think, of course, the context is very difficult. Like we have, in particular in universities, you have like the role of universities in Brazil, like to doing extensions. So it's a stimulation to go and to connect with communities more than I think in Europe. But of course, the context like demands a lot, this kind of connections. I think we are progressing in terms of like how we can build or at least have a better balance, because I would say that there is the balance in the space you provide, like to bring this together and to develop a good like understand from both, like, and to connect and to transform this in something that it could like benefit society. And looking to myself, I think it's very difficult to, I agree with Rocío that it's very difficult to separate. And sometimes you feel like you are like looking at activism and you feel like, oh, so maybe Julian as an outsider of the academic, you will like have this kind of reflection sometimes. But I think the point is how instrumental is the academic world. And when you start like engage with like some kind of research or more activist, or transform your research in something more action in practice, you feel like, oh, the other side, you have to produce articles, you have to produce your thesis, you have to instrumentalize what you are getting from the field. So I think this is very hard in my case, like to have like the freedom to act more and to transform more in practice. So I follow a lot of Paulo Freire in my research, and this is like the case of most of the time when Paulo Freire is talking about how we connect theories and practice. And I think I could say that it has changed a lot, but there's a lot to change, like to find ways to connect practice and theories. And you could be like more activist as a more natural than like trying to compare, and because you are the same person, and it's just the way you are looking or developing your research or what you are looking in, interested in the field. I don't know if it was clear, but if not, please let me know. I can try to explain that. Make sense?
Yeah.
Some sense. Please, Steve. I think you're muted.
Yes, I'm unmuted now. Oh, well, thank you for that. That was very interesting. I was, when I was talking to Rocío and Alex before the seminar, you know, I was saying, I you know, don't know a lot about the South American context. And then when we say about South American context, there's a huge generalization that's going to have some similarities where it's huge and diverse as well. But that was very informative. And what it immediately connected to was a great deal of my experiences, probably in this time scale, Alex, that you explained about coming into politics and trying to balance, you know, academic work, knowledge making with political activism. And same for me, I think really from about 2016, I was politically active largely around left populism in England, both within the Labour Party and around the Corbyn movement and Momentum, and also in the trade unions around the university. And my big question then is moving from, as I joined the university as a mathematics educator, and was moving towards more sociological questions about education, which then also met with my involvement in left social movements or social movement building. It's been a complex thing that I remember sitting at in KPP meetings before it was knowledge, power, politics, when it was culture, politics, and some social justice or justice, global justice. So culture, politics, global justice it was, as I was trying to kind of think about being a sociologist of education. And, you know, but my questions then, I think I was raising and I was interested in is, well, how can I be a scholar activist? What does that mean and how does that do? Anyway, I applied for a small grant from the university to look at that, but they turned me down. But it was only a small grant, but I've been thinking about that question ever since in what I'm doing and with the ever changing of politics. And it was just fascinating then that the talk she gave were across all these issues, but in a very different context. So I think what I was thinking about is really, well, I'll come to a question and just in a moment, because I was just thinking about a couple of things that's about that. And I think, Rocío, you were touching on some really important things there about who you are in this and how, you know, there's almost a paradox in the sense of, as a scholar activist, you're you have an integrated sense of self, But by the same token, then we look at the experience that we are divided between a social identity and an individual, as you expressed in the kind of biopolitics and the necropolitics of this, in that there is society is making this separation for us between person and individual in that respect. And then we trying to integrate that in terms of our scholar activism. You can probably say whether I've misunderstood that. But I think that's a really interesting question. And I mean, where I am at the moment, for many reasons, I think, but I'm not going to explain why, I'm more doing purely scholarship. And I've pretty much withdrawn from being in an activist role. I'd say there's many reasons for that. But one of the things I think about is when Hannah Arendt was asked about feminism, and she said, I know Jo Dillabo uses this many times as a gender scholar and someone who's also critical of gender scholarship as well. In the same time, she said, well, when you look at the world in a particular way, from a particular perspective of emancipation that may seem like a good thing, like left politics or like feminism, the question Hannah Arendt was asking, what don't you see? What do you rule out? And I think while with involved in less populism, there are so many, there's a passion, there's an involvement. And then when you get involved in political organization, there's decision-making, there's possibilities, there's futures to consider. But then when you get involved in scholarship, you're trying to kind of be analytic. I don't say there's an objective position, but all those positions can frame each other. So I'm doing some scholarship for a time and thinking about what I have to say to left politics on this. In fact, I have something to say and I need to write it up, and I'd be keen to share it. But the question is then, after all that preamble, that I hope is not too abstract, is really this relationship. So in this, what is the relationship between, and I group these three together as particular kind of social phenomena: social movements, protest, and populism. And I would say that populism, whenever I use that, I've used that in publications, describe things as populist movement. Many people to the centre of left and certainly centre right, if they get associated with populism, they just see it as a very bad thing. So I'm most cautious about using that word. So I see that populism, social movements, and protests is a particular form of sociality. Then that then is typified by what Alex was describing, his involvement in left politics and my involvement in left politics. But then you get to the position where I'm going to Labour Party conferences, you go into the World Social Forum, and this is then is a political organisation, which is a very different form. It's resting on decision-making. Social movements rely on a topic in which it wants to alert society to the topic of concern to an affected party. A political organisation is making decisions over the nature of making collectively binding decisions as politics. And so it's the contrast between those two, and I'll come to Rocío's CLACSO in a minute, but I want to there's a reference point of this, because I know English political history better than I do South American political history, and particularly around the modern political history, in that Ralph Miliband, a Marxist scholar, always talked about the labour movement in the UK in these terms. In order to be successful, it had to harness social movements, getting people vote, but political organisation. What he was talking about was parliaments as the primary political organisation, which they have been up until 50, 60 years ago. Now, political organisations are moving out into different kinds of organisations. And it's interesting, Alex, you described the World Social Forum as an NGO with space, and so it's this kind of challenge of harnessing those two. And Ralph Miliband didn't answer that question, but it does become there's huge contradictions in that the that the left haven't conceptualized. And that's perhaps where scholarship comes in. Now, in terms of, with then the third relationship, so relationship, social movements and political organization, political decision-making, collective, and the communication about making binding political decisions or collectively binding political decisions with the medium of power. The third aspect of this in relation to scholarship is, of course, knowledge making and the system of scientific communication more generally. And I think then what we have is these three important distinctions that, Rocío visiting CLACSO, being part of that and reporting on that, and what you did, Alex. So I want, my question is generally to this group is how those things relate to each other and how those things coexist. And for Rocío, I think the conceptual aspects of this is absolutely vital. How we deal with those concepts and how we understand those and how we understand those in society is important for scholarship. See what you think, see what you can make of what I've said.
Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, there's a lot to think about what you share, Steve. But I was, maybe I'm going to focus my comment in terms of how these spaces, especially a special space like the World Social Forum, is interest to create a movement, a process that people start meet other people and find a way to dream or to develop new ideas. I'm talking this because it's very related to the case study of the Popular University of Social Movements that emerged in the World Social Forum. But now it was a seed in the World Social Forum, but now it's a way to connect. And it is a very local, now, these days, is a very local activity or university, a conception of university of the social movement, then happened. It's in a very local way, with academics and social movements meeting together. But there is a unbalanced power in terms of how I can see the academic world develop or guide methodology, the process. And that's my interest now. It's to understand how you became after 20 years of this World Social Forum became very huge, very big, but also you need to transform. And in the social movements core, I think the one thing that is very important for them is autonomy, being autonomous and also open to react to the change in the context. And I think this is not the same in the academic. It's very slow, sometimes more conservative. So there is a structure that is much harder to change. So that's the difference, I think, between when you're trying to find ways or spaces to put together these two different worlds. And I would say that there is no perfect space or perfect process, but just a way to keep going with different experiences and to try in different spaces. That's why I'm very interested to understand, for example, in the future, I hope I could do this in the future, is this role of extension that is very part of the culture in Latin America and Brazil. And it's interesting because it became from an idea in the 19th century from the Oxford and Cambridge, went to the US and became very particular in Latin America. But it's a way to promote this bridge between society, the communities and social movements with the academic. So I'm thinking that there is no one fit solution, one solution for everything, but is way to find and to experiment, to keep experiment different approach and to promote this kind of bridge and interchange, exchange between academic and the social work and the social movements and communities. So I addressed just a few or two all your comments, but I'm going to pass to Rocío to add.
With my mic. Yeah, it's also, I think, maybe they can revitalize each other, right? Academia, social movements in a critical way, as a critical friends, probably. I don't think that there should be like a blind support of alliance, because probably the different angles from which each field is coming from, and the very different structure that also Alex was pointing out, should play an advantage, maybe, to actually support each other and revitalize constantly. Also because, for instance, I think the progressist left in Latin America has a huge depth with social movements with indigenous nations. So it's not like social scientists that are that hope to work for social justice and equality should provide a blind support to anyone who calls itself from the left, right? Because as I think you were suggesting, maybe, or the concept you were using can show us that can lead to some problems as well. So I like this idea of revitalizing each other in a constant way. And I wanted to make this more a conversation. I wanted to bring there's a lot of things going on the chat. So Tiffany Jimenez, I don't know if you would like to read your comment out loud, or maybe you would like me to read it. Tiffany? Okay, so Tiffany was saying, well, some thoughts about this relation as well. Academics can both examine the ways in which systems and structures exert power for extracting resources from communities, and uplift the perspectives of those in places where resource extraction is happening. All forms of resources become explicitly connected to the political. Take a stand. We are not objective observers in reality. Question traditional methods of science and expand what counts as valid inquiry. Thank you for that, Tiffany. And she also posted a very recent special issue that touches upon some of these issues. Andrea, I don't know if you would like to read your comment, or you would like me to read it. Should I read it? Or you wanna?
Yes, you can read it.
Okay. So Andrea was saying, was commenting on the situation in Brazil. She was saying that the social movement's front line differs substantially from country to country. So now in the US, the social battle outcoming against or favor the abortion, for instance, and in Brazil, the indigenous and the Amazonia forest protection. In Myanmar, the battle against military dictatorship. And again, in Brazil, the social political movements, again, the ideas of coup, of golpe from genocide in Bolsonaro's government. Heidi, would like to comment?
Sí, hola. Antes de mi comentario, I would like to know if this conversation, I know we are recording it, are we going to post it on Twitter under CLAREC? Alex, do you know?
I don't, and YouTube, I think. If that's
on YouTube?
Yeah, or maybe not. If we can just keep it.
Because I have some people asking where we're going to post this, so they can connect and watch later the rest of it.
Yeah, we usually put it on the YouTube CLAREC channel.
Okay, so that in YouTube CLAREC channel, perfect. So my comment is more about, like, I'm not a social scientist, but I think as a citizen of the world, I need to be aware of what is happening, and that helped me in my other roles in life to be aware of what can I do as a researcher, as a teacher, how to build these meaningful relationships, and to keep in mind what is respectful and how to open spaces for dialogue. So it's just a note and thanking Alexandre and Rocío for opening this space for dialogue for everyone. So big applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there any comment from, yeah?
Can you hear me? Yes? Yes, it's working. Just a question. I saw Andrea asked about the public, the participants, where they're from. So I don't know about this event. I think they didn't share the final document with the information, but usually the last year I got the information. It was mostly a lot of Brazilians. It was virtual event because of the pandemic. And this year, of course, like most than half, I think I would say, like, for my perception, I don't have the data, I can share when I have it. Mostly they are Mexican because of the event was there. So it was I saw a lot of people, it was the first time they could access and be part of the event. So yes, I think, and also the rules in terms of pandemic, the prices of the tickets, so probably the situation made very difficult for some people who participate in the past, they couldn't go. And also most of the seminars, they were like online, available online. So I think a lot of people now is starting to balance, especially in this kind of event, to be at home and participate online. But for the World Social Forum is a huge difference, right? Especially because the goal is to be together and to build this articulation that we know that online it's quite impossible.
Okay. Oh, I think we are about in time to a little bit over, but maybe if there are not more questions or comments, we could start closing. Yeah. And thank you everyone for coming. It was very enrichful to share and to kind of put into language these ideas. As Alex was mentioning, yeah, the video will be available on YouTube, and we will share it also through our social media, I think Twitter, Instagram, probably. Thank you for coming again. We hope to see you in our next events that we don't know yet which one are gonna be, but we're gonna let you know in time. Gracias a todos y todas.